So I wanted to start today with just a little bit of background on who and what Shadow Lake Nature Preserve is and what we do. And we get asked a lot why Shadow is in all caps. And that's because it's actually an acronym and it means Save Habitat and Diversity of Wetlands. But we also happen to protect land surrounding Shadow Lake in Renton. So while Save Habitat and Diversity of Wetlands is its official name, we're most known by Shadow Lake Nature Preserve, and that's how we do business. Our mission is to save dwindling wildlife habitat and foster a community of environmental stewards in South King County. And to do that, we have three pillars that help drive our mission forward, and that is preservation, education, and restoration. Shadow is probably most known for protecting Shadow Lake Bog. And the parcel of land that contains the bog habitat is the original parcel that was placed under protection and also the reason that our organization was formed. And if you know what a bog is, it's a very unique type of wetland and it takes thousands and thousands of years to form. So it was imperative to place that land under protection, and the founders recognized this. And today, Shadow actually has acquired over 100 acres of critical wetland and upland forest habitat. And we have seen all sorts of wildlife use the nature preserve, including owls, bobcats, deer, bear, and of course, amphibians. And we're probably second known for our educational programs. If you follow us on social media, you've probably seen us talk a lot about education and upcoming programming. We really enjoy offering opportunities for our community to learn about wetlands, wildlife, watersheds, and all other environmental topics. So thank you all today for coming and being part of one of our community classes. All right, next slide. So lastly, we do restoration work at the nature preserve, and that's to create healthier habitat for the wildlife that calls this land home. But the history of caring for the land that's under protection at the nature preserve didn't start with our organization. The Snoqualmie tribe and the Muckleshoot tribes are the original stewards of the land that we care for today. Here are some pictures of the restoration work that's occurring in our upland forested habitats. So these upland parcels were once slated for development and partially deforested. So there was a ton of work needing to be done to remove harmful invasive species that took over and to reestablish that healthy mixed conifer forest that supports more wildlife. There's of course still a lot of work to be done, and we want to be able to do it with all the teams of restoration volunteers that help these efforts. So our uplands is, where most of our current restoration efforts take place. But as I mentioned earlier, there's a huge restoration project on the original parcel, the bog parcel, about 20 years ago. And so we'll go to the next slide and we'll hear from Max a little bit more about what occurred back then.
Great, thank you, Devin. So as Devin said, about 20 years ago, actually, 1995, we bought the original 18.5 acre parcel. There was a red tag on the parcel that we had negotiated with King County to be able to purchase the parcel with commitment that we would do restoration. There was basically where the amphibian pond is today, that was primarily a dump area. So there was a variety of things in that dump, auto parts, bed mattress springs, I mean, you name it, it was there. And so we began to work on what would the plan be for a good restoration and what work would complement the peat bog and help to maintain the health of the peat bog at the same time. So across the street from Shadow, there is a spring and wetland complex there as well, which feeds quite a bit of water into the system. And so we decided that building a pond would offer the opportunity to bring that water towards the peat bog to maintain the health, and also an opportunity to look at amphibian health, because we also noted that there was a lot of frogs that would be crossing the road in springtime, and frogs and cars are not compatible. So we worked on developing a habitat for the frogs, but also put in a box culvert, which allowed safe passage under the road for the frogs to get into the pond. The pond was, you know, we later determined that we had a healthy population of frogs, working with Klaus Schwichter, who was a King County amphibian and wetland specialist. And we designed the pond to kind of facilitate the health of those amphibians. The pond is not only used by frogs, but a variety of other animals, which you'll hear about a little later on. But we took 110 truck and trailer loads of dump material out of that pond area.
Well, that was really great. You could go to the next slide, Karen, just to show what our amphibian pond looks like today. It's there on the right. And some of the amphibians we've seen as well. So this is the pond that we monitor today. As you know, remembering from the slide before, it's hard to imagine that there was 110 truckloads of trash that came out of this. You know, it'd be hard to tell that this wasn't always pristine habitat because it looks really great today. So yeah, that's it for Shadow's presentation. We're going to turn it over to Katie now to talk about the zoo's monitoring program.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here today, and it's really cool to hear the history, more of the history. And as I think I mentioned at the very beginning, my first visit to Shadow was in 1998, and so it's been great to be a part of its development over time. We've had a long history of partnering on everything from education programs to monitoring programs like the one we're going to talk about today. More recently, we've started doing some carnivore monitoring using camera traps at Shadow Lake as well. So we're really excited to partner on that and just on helping people live with the awesome wildlife that's there, whether it's the amphibians or the carnivores. So thanks a lot for having me today. So yeah, I'm Katie Remine. I'm the Living Northwest Conservation Coordinator in the Wildlife Conservation Division at Woodland Park Zoo. And let's go to the next slide. Just wanted to start off with a land acknowledgement, and thanks to Devin and Karen and Max for starting us off with that as well. But this is Woodland Park Zoo's land acknowledgement that we worked with several local tribes on, just recognizing that the lands that the zoo is on, as well as those that we monitor in this amphibian monitoring program, are the lands of the tribal signatories of the Treaty of Point Elliott of 1855, whose stewardship for the waters, plants, land, and animal relatives in the Northwest has continued since time immemorial. And we acknowledge that the stewardship, the sovereign rights of the tribal signatories, and our responsibility to join with these tribes to inspire and advance the restoration of relationships between humans and the living world around us. And below that, you'll see this translated in the Lashute Seed language. So thank you for that. And we can continue on to the next slide. So I think most of you have a good sense of what amphibians are, but just to review, they're called amphibians because they have sort of a double life. Many of them lead a double life. So amphi means both and bios means life. So they do that in two different ways. Most of them have an aquatic and a terrestrial life stage, and then they have very different body forms from when they're larvae after they've hatched out of eggs and as an adult. And so that's, really the main things that characterize amphibians. They include frogs, toads, newts, salamanders, and a few other little odd ones that we don't have in the Northwest, but that's mainly what we have here. And next slide, please. So I wanted to share with you today about the Amphibian Monitoring Community Science Program that Woodland Park Zoo has been involved with since 2012. At the time, it started as a collaboration with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and there were also a couple of other zoos involved, Northwest Trek and Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, and we each continue to be involved in monitoring amphibians, just in different ways. But the goals of the program were both to engage people in the community in monitoring to help them connect with wetlands and amphibians, but also to provide the Fish and Wildlife Department and other land managers such as Shadow with data on the breeding activity patterns, kind of the when and the where different species are breeding. And we focus in King and Snohomish counties. So next slide, please. So why did we start this program? Well, You might not know this, but the Pacific Northwest is actually quite high in amphibian diversity, particularly among the salamanders. So worldwide, the Southeast United States and the Northwest United States are kind of hot spots for salamander diversity. And so we think it's really important, given that we help to keep an eye on them. That's also why we use some of the protocols we use. There are other kind of frog watch type programs where people go out and listen for frogs calling, but salamanders don't call. So that's partly why we use the protocol that we do, is so we can detect the salamanders as well. And next slide, please. And then the other main reason is the world is facing globally an amphibian extinction crisis. The IUCN, which is a global conservation organization, estimates that 41% of all amphibian species around the world are threatened. And that's due to a number of different factors. And if we go to the next slide, I'll run through those. So of course, a lot of amphibians depend on wetlands, and we've significantly altered those landscapes for residential development, agricultural activity, different things like that. They're also affected by invasive species and disease pathogens. So there are some fungal and viral diseases that have affected amphibians around the world and locally that have been, detected, and more has become known about them over the last 20 or so years. They are sensitive to pollution. So because their skin is permeable and they lay their eggs in the water, they can be sensitive to pollution in the water. And then of course, with climate change comes changes in hydrology, like how water is functioning in wetlands and water temperatures, and things like that. And those can also affect amphibians as well. So for these reasons, because we have such a great diversity and there are these threats, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping an eye on the amphibians in our region. And that's why we started this program. Next slide, please. So this is where volunteers come in. So community science that many of you are probably involved in is just getting the public, people in general, residents, community members involved in scientific research and collecting data and thinking about what that data means. And so this program was established to involve as wide a range of community members as possible, because the people who are employed to keep an eye on wetlands, like the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Ecology, are doing a great job, but they can't be everywhere. And so by engaging community members, we're able to look for amphibians and keep an eye on these trends in a lot more sites and a lot more places than would otherwise be able to happen. So every year we've been able to involve right around 75 volunteers monitoring at least 15 sites around our region. And so that's been a great effort. And thanks to everyone who's been involved. I think several of you are on the program here today. Next slide, please. So the goals kind of, again, are providing widespread, long-term, openly available monitoring data on when and where local amphibians are breeding. And we do keep an eye out both for the ones that are common, because they're common now, but we want to make sure we're keeping an eye on that. But we also keep an eye out for those that are more rare. And then for our participants, we hope that people develop a greater appreciation for local amphibians and their wetland habitats, and that also the program can be a way people might get on a pathway to broader engagement in stewardship and conservation. And next slide, please. So we focus on 5 frog and toad species and 3 salamanders, and the characteristics they share is that they all are amphibians that lay their eggs in lowland, still water habitats, and the eggs are mostly laid in exposed locations so that we can find them. They're pigmented, so we can see them and take pictures of them. The parents don't take care of them, so we won't bother any adult amphibians, and they all have an aquatic larval stage. So we'll see the tadpoles or the larvae in the water as well. And then I'll give you a rundown. If you can go to the next slide. these are the species that we monitor. And if we keep going, I'll show you kind of how these species are paced with their breeding throughout the year. So if we go to the next slide. So for Western Washington, I was thinking as we planned this program, I was like, people might be wondering why we're talking about amphibians in December, but really they are just about to start breeding. Spring comes early in the Pacific Northwest. The long-toed salamanders are first, so they'll start laying their eggs as early as January and into March. And then red-legged frogs also start mid to late January, and they only go until late February. So pretty short window early in the season for them. The northwestern salamanders lay eggs in mid-February to late March. And then if we go to the next slide, Oregon spotted frogs, which are one of the rare ones we keep an eye out for, are mid-February to late March, as are Pacific tree frogs, which are probably our most common amphibian that we find. And then rough-skinned newts, late February to March, although their eggs are very small and hard to see. And so more often folks see the adults of those. And then next slide, lastly, the western toad, which is only in, tend to only find them in more outlying areas in Western Washington. And then bullfrogs are the one invasive species that we keep an eye out for, and they lay eggs from April to August. All right, and next slide from there. So just to give you a sense of where our program has focused, so the sites are selected each year. We talk with a lot of different land managers and stakeholders in wetland ecology to get kind of a wish list every year of sites to monitor. We can't do them all, but we do our best. And so we try to fulfill the project aim, so collect that data about the breeding, but also make sure that the sites are accessible to volunteers. Try to cover as broad an area as possible. And then last year we started talking about that we'd really like to monitor some sites that have beaver activity. A lot of people are really curious about sort of the interaction of beavers and amphibians. So we're trying to include some sites with beaver activity. So the dots on this map just show areas that we have monitored over the 10-year run of the program thus far. And next slide. So how the program works is we have our training every January. Typically we have part of it online and then some of it in person. Last year we did have to do it all online. This year we're hoping to go back to doing part of it in person. And so we kind of go over the protocol and we do some practice in the field together. And we organize our volunteers into teams of 4 to 5 people. And usually there's a team leader who kind of organizes the team. And I think we have here today, I think I saw Christine, who's our team leader for the Shadow Lake team, or has been this last year. So thanks for joining us, Christine. I might call on you in a minute here and we talk about what things have been found at Shadow Lake. Next slide, please. So yeah, we go over the protocol and safety considerations. We do talk about how to find and identify as best as possible egg masses and how to record the data and enter the data. And we kind of go over how to use the different equipment. And if you're curious, I think the next slide, I talk about the equipment we use. So we can go to that. So hip waders, because the protocol does involve stepping into the water, one person stepping into the water. We use these white plastic cutting boards that you can slide behind the egg masses for better photos. And then we this year have added a waterproof pouch so people can put their phone in there and take pictures underwater. Polarized sunglasses can really help cut the glare when you're trying to look into the water. And we have rulers so people can get measurements. We have GPS units so people can take a latitude and longitude of the sighting. And then this thing that you see in the picture here is called an aquascope. It's a tube that helps to cut the glare and helps you look at egg masses that might be underwater. And sometimes people can even take photos through them. It's pretty cool. So those tools, the zoo lends out to our teams and that can help them with their monitoring. And next slide. So just a quick summary. We won't go into like all the data, but just a summary. So from 2012, we've monitored from 2012, but we kind of consider 2012 sort of pilot year. So really looking at the data from 2013 to 2021, we have found most of the species that we've set out to find, except for the Oregon spotted frog, which is the endangered one in our state. And Western toads don't tend to be very prevalent at our sites. So we found most of the others besides that. And we've had a lot of observations every year at our sites. And next slide, just to show you from 2021. So again, we kind of get started in January, but we don't have a lot of our monitoring activity happening in January, but we do find those long-toed salamanders that start early, we do find them. And then February, March, and April are kind of the months that we find the most activity, and then kind of winding down towards the summer season, depending on the sites. And then next slide. So I wanted to make sure to talk a little bit about what we found at Shadow Lake. So we've monitored there since 2016. And on this map, this is just, all of our data goes into an online tool called iNaturalist that anyone can go and look at. And so this is just a screenshot of what that looks like. If you search Amphibians of Washington on iNaturalist, you can find the project. And this is just kind of zooming in and seeing where the points are. So we have monitored both the amphibian pond that Max was talking about, as well as there's another pond in the upland habitat, the upper pond. And so we've monitored in both places and found a lot of amphibians in both places. So I think on the next slide, we have a graph of what we found. So primarily the ones we find most consistently are the long-toed salamanders, the northern Pacific tree frogs, and the northern red-legged frogs. In that first year of monitoring, just one or two sightings of northwestern salamanders or rough-skinned newts. And I think the newt was an adult, that someone found in the leaf litter adjacent to the pond. So we do find those not as frequently though, but very cool that we had these species at the pond as well. And I'll show a couple pictures here, and then if Christine wants to jump in, I'll see if Christine has any fun stories too. So if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to show you kind of what the eggs and the larvae look like of these species. So the top pictures are the long-toed salamander. There's an egg mass, and those eggs are look like they're just about to hatch. They're kind of are not that round egg shape as when they're freshly laid, but they're in that what I call like the banana stage where they're just about to hatch. And then on the right, you can see the long-toed salamander larvae. And then on the bottom is an egg mass kind of in that same phase, the little banana phase, right before they're about to hatch. And then the tree frog, so that's the tree frog eggs on the bottom and the tree frog larvae on the right. So one difference between salamander larvae and frog larvae, or what we often call tadpoles, and you can see in these pictures, is the salamanders have those very visible gills, and often they're really billowy and feathery and sticking out to the side like that. So that is one thing that tells you that they're salamander larvae and not frog tadpoles. And the next slide, red-legged frogs, I didn't put an egg picture, but I do have a picture of an adult that we found at the upper pond one time, and they're really beautiful frogs with these beautiful golden eyes and red legs. So pretty fun. Christine, any stories you want to share or add about what was found at Shadow this last year? Oh, for some reason, can't hear you. It doesn't look like you're muted, but can't. Try again. No. Oh, there you go. Yep, there you go.
I'll take my headphones off. Maybe that's the problem. Yeah. So I'm Christine, and I'm the team leader for the Amphibian Monitoring Project at Shadow, and I was team leader in 2021 and team leader in 2018. And in 2021, we did I helped with both the lower and the upper pond. In 2018, we split and had 2 teams, so the monitoring went faster, and Katie did the upper pond with her group, and then I did lower pond. And this year doing both, it was interesting for me to see the differences in the bodies of water and also the amount of egg masses and the length of time we saw egg masses. So the upper pond is deeper, the water's cleaner, and we saw egg masses for longer in that pond, which is typical of what historically has happened at that site. And then at the lower pond, the water is more shallow, it has more debris in it, and we don't see the egg masses for nearly as long, and or it's just harder to see them because of the amount of vegetation that's in there. And we hear tree frogs. I haven't seen any adult frogs. It's so dense with the vegetation there, it's really hard to see any adults. I'm just amazed you even got this red-legged frog in the picture. So yeah, and what was interesting this year was that heat wave that we had in June. And after that, there was nothing left in the ponds. There were no eggs, there were no adults. So I'll be really interested to see in the upcoming year how it has affected our egg masses and our amphibian population, because we were expecting to start seeing more tadpoles and larvae and getting more, you know, almost to the stage where they'd be coming out of the water in July. And there was nothing. There was still water left, but there was really nothing in it. Maybe an egg mass, but it was like all of a sudden everything was just gone because the water got so hot.
Yeah, right. So early in the season. Yeah. Very
early. So after that, there was nothing left to monitor, and it kind of just ended the season early. And I'm interested to see how that's going to change things for next year.
Yeah, I think that really shows kind of by doing this monitoring year to year, you know, how those trends, it's important to kind of have this information to be able to look at those trends. It will be really interesting to see what happens this year. Thanks so much, Christine.
Yeah, not a problem.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for your leadership on the team. It's fantastic. Great. Well, and then lastly, I just wanted to, if we go to the next slide, just wanted to mention, you know, we've talked about how having this kind of baseline information and long-term trends are really helpful. This isn't a research study. It's not, you know, doesn't have a study design set up to test hypotheses or anything. But it can, you know, if people do have questions that they want to research, this data can provide a starting point and help people to think about, you know, what sites they might want to use for further research. And we have had both undergraduate and graduate students participate with the project and kind of do their research in tandem with the project. And so that's been really fantastic. And the kinds of questions that we think are important about amphibians right now is response to restoration, like we've been talking about, including beaver-driven restoration, which is becoming a thing here in the Northwest for sure, is how beavers really are ecosystem engineers and how important they are for our wetland ecosystems. We can also look at things like shifts in the timing of egg laying or responses to climate events like Christine just brought up. You know, over time, we can kind of look at that big heat event that we had in the Northwest this June and what the impacts of that are, as well as overall responses to urbanization in different landscapes, because we do monitor some sites that are not as protected as shadow and might be more prone to different landscape changes over time. So that is what I had to share. I think we have some time for questions. Also, if you've become interested in volunteering with this project, we welcome you to join us. We are just recruiting right now for the next season. So if you email us at monitoring@zoo.org and just put 2022 volunteer interest in the subject line, we can send you the training registration link. And we would love to have you join us. Our training will be There's some online pieces that will start at the end of December here, and then we'll meet in January to do our in-person training this year. So thank you so much. And yeah, I'm open to whatever questions you have. I'll check the chat here and see what questions have come up as well. But I think the ones in the chat have been answered, which is great. Cool, lots of good information about the history of the pond and the kind of testing that's been done. And yeah, definitely the idea that amphibians are indicators is really an important one.
So this is Max. So an interesting story that I've heard from Klaus Richter in the past, who's an amphibian specialist, said that most frogs that you hear in movies, although the setting might be in Africa or something like that, the actual sound is actually the Pacific Northwest chorus frog, because it is the loudest frog for its size. So
yes, and then as Christine said, they have this uncanny ability to like totally be quiet the minute you get close. So it's like you'll hear them, they're super loud, and then you're like, oh, let me see if I can go find them, and then they clam up, and then you can't find them.
Yes, we had KUOW here once to do recording, and let me tell you, it was very difficult. And at times, you can't even hear yourself from all the frogs, and then suddenly you try to get them, and like you said, they just stop.
Yeah, it's so funny, very frustrating. And yeah, thanks. I see other volunteers who are on with us today. And then a question about, can a 10-year-old be a volunteer? And yeah, we welcome mixed age groups. Basically, if a 10-year-old wants to volunteer, if you're under 14, you can volunteer, but you have to have a parent or caregiver who's volunteering with you, who's also a trained volunteer and who's with you at every monitoring visit. So yeah, definitely children can be involved, but need to volunteer with a parent or caregiver who's also a volunteer and trained. But yeah.
I just want to say, hey, I'm Sarah. I was the one that was asking the questions about the soil contamination. Katie knows me. I'm
another volunteer at another site.
Volunteer for the amphibians for the for the past several years, and I actually many years ago worked in a water and soil contamination lab. So I'm always interested because obviously amphibians of all species would definitely be the most infected, whether it be in water or soil that's leaching into the water, if there's any contaminants that are involved, because certainly they would be the first affected.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, the amphibians are always considered an indicator species, right, of water quality and potential threats that may be in the water or in soils. And so that's how we actually started our initial monitoring with Klaus Richter. We would put up funnel traps to check out the different species. Also, another thing that's not too well known is that although there may not be actual water in the pond, there are various newts and different species that use the mud and actually survive in that mud during that drier period until they're ready to come out in the real world. So
Great. Well, if no other questions, we can probably go to our quiz time, right?
Can I jump in with a question, Katie?
Sure, absolutely.
I am wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the American bullfrog and why it's a problem, and maybe what kind of features make it a problem. Is there anything that you can share about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So bullfrogs are native to the eastern United States. In the early 1900s, they were brought over to the Western United States, and in Washington in particular, they were brought to be a game species. So people wanted to have bullfrog legs, which I don't know that many people do anymore, but I'm not sure. But that's why they were originally brought here. And they're a very large frog. The tadpoles are large as well as the adults. And they, as adults, will eat just about anything that they can find, and that includes other amphibians, that includes turtles. So our western pond turtle is an endangered species in our state, and bullfrogs will eat the babies of those and cause issues for them, as well as even baby waterfowl. So ducklings have been known to be eaten by bullfrogs, so they can have a big impact on our local species. They are difficult to eradicate once they get into a system, but there are some, because of the hydrology and whether the water level stays high year round, or if ponds dry up, that can affect whether bullfrogs can live there. So we do have wetlands around our region that don't have them, but we have a lot of wetlands that do have them. So so it's definitely something we like to keep an eye on. It's nothing that we're, working on controlling in the ponds that we're monitoring, but in some places where, in particular, I mentioned that western pond turtle, that endangered turtle in our state, and the zoo works on a program to recover populations of that turtle. In some ponds, bullfrogs are really closely monitored and kept out so that the turtles can survive. So yeah, it's a tough one for sure. Yeah, thanks for that question.
Thank you. Anyone else have any questions they want to jump in before? We've got a quiz coming up, so I hope you all are paying attention. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in the chat, so we're going to go ahead and start our quiz. This is just for fun. We don't know who's answering, so don't get stressed out, but let's just enjoy. So this is our warm-up question, and I'm going to put a poll up in a second, and you'll see a little window pop up on your screen where you can answer the question, and then we'll share what everybody said. So here is the first question. Which one of these is a frog? Now, let me get that poll up. Can everybody still see the screen? Okay, good. Here we go. So go ahead and type in your answer. Think really hard. We've got some good answers coming in. Oh, very good. Good participation. I'm impressed you guys are on top of this. We'll give you a few more seconds here. I love it. Okay, we're going to end the poll, and I'll show you what we said. So most of you did a great job and identified this is Kermit the Frog on the right, C. And we'll just leave the rest up to interpretation here. So we'll go to the next question. Now that you're warmed up, here's one that takes a little more reading. Which of these is not one of the most common threats to amphibians? And I'm just going to go ahead and read them quickly. If you want: habitat alteration, B is invasive species and disease pathogens, C is pollution, D is climate change or severe weather, and E is spilling coffee on your keyboard. So let's go to the next poll where you can answer that one now that you've had a time to think about it. All right, very impressive, very impressive. 100% correct. I don't recommend spilling coffee on your keyboard, but it's not the biggest problem for the amphibians. So our next, so 4 of these species are native to Washington and 1 is an invasive species. So which one is that invasive species? All right, let's see. Nice job. So the American bullfrog is our invasive species. We've got some good listeners in the audience. Again, the same frog and toads here pictured, and one of them is a listed species. So it's rare, it's threatened, and it's federally threatened. And in the state of Washington, it is endangered. So let's get that poll up here. We can answer that. Got a few more seconds here. Waiting for a couple more people. And we will end it. And here's what you said. Oregon spotted frog. There we are.
Yep, there's a few populations kind of around, I think they're on Joint Base Lewis McChord. So even, you know, we don't often think of military bases as protected habitat, but they really do protect a lot of habitat. And then also there's a couple of populations up in Whatcom County, a little more common in Oregon, but let's see. And then I see the question, is it true that there are more Oregon spotted frogs in alpine lakes? No, the western toads are the ones that tend to be above 500 feet elevation is where you tend to find the western toads. I think it's, or no, that's the Cascades frog. Cascades frog is above 500 feet, but western toads do tend to be a little more outlying and they can be higher up. But Oregon spotted frogs tend to be a little more kind of flat, not necessarily lowland, but definitely flat land, not necessarily like mountainous areas. Yeah.
Nice, thank you. So which one of these is the rough-skinned newt? I will launch the poll. All right, ending the poll and let's look at our results. Well done. Okay, I've got one more, I believe. There's the rough skin newt. You can see it's got some rough skin, which is a nice giveaway. Do they always look that easy, Katie?
Rough skin newts are relatively easy to identify. Also that orange belly, you know, the dark brown top and orange belly and the skin that looks kind of bumpy, more than shiny. You can see the other ones look a little more shiny.
Nice. Okay, this is our last question. So you can see all of the species that that we've talked about this morning that are included in the monitoring project. And there's 3 species here that have been consistently found so far at Shadow Lake Nature Center. So every year that they've done the monitoring, and we'll see if, and you'll be able to choose multiple choice here. So we'll see if you can remember which ones we have at our preserve. Anyone else want to take a guess? Oh, there we go. Very nice. So here are the results of our poll.
Yeah,
And-
that this is probably the hardest question. So yeah, the red-legged frog, the Pacific tree frog, and the long-toed salamanders are the ones that have been found most consistently at Shadow Lake Nature Preserve, at least through the monitoring, the kind of protocol we're using, which is looking in the water for the egg masses. If you were to go and look around in the leaf litter, you might find adults of the northwestern salamander or the rough-skinned newt. And so it just kind of depends on sometimes it depends on the way that you're looking. So with the protocol we use, those are the ones that we've been finding most often. It's funny though, at a lot of our sites, even some of the quite urban sites, we find northwestern salamander eggs more commonly. But at Shadow Lake, definitely the long-toed salamander is the most common salamander that's found. So that's interesting. Yeah, and western toads could be, I would not be surprised if there's western toads nearby. Gail mentioned seeing one. Yeah, they can be huge. So it would be really neat if if folks ever saw them. Their tadpoles are very dark in color, almost black, and they often congregate. So if you saw like hundreds of really dark tadpoles all hanging out together, that could possibly be western toad. And their eggs are very different. They lay their eggs in these long strings. So it'll be long, straight strings of eggs. So if you see those, that would be western toad eggs. Yeah.
Nice. Is there anything we should know about handling amphibians safely?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So in our project, we deter people from handling the egg masses or the larvae or the frogs and salamanders, just because, we're going in and monitoring once a month. We want to cause the least disturbance possible. So we don't want to damage the egg masses. We don't want to harm the amphibians. So for our project, we ask people not to handle at all. In some cases it can be okay, especially if you kind of keep your hands in the water or keep your hands wet to gently cradle an amphibian and to take a closer look at it. The rough-skinned newt is a amphibian that does have poison glands. And this probably goes for really, handling any kind of wildlife, is you want to wash your hands carefully after, just so that you don't get any of that poison gland. It won't kill you, but best not to ingest any of that poison from the rough-skinned newts. But that's what those little bumps, so that's part of their defense, right? It helps them not get eaten by predators. And western toads have some glands as well. So really, I would say, I know it's really fun to get a closer look, and so I wouldn't say like never do that, but just try to be cautious about the impact you're having on the amphibians. So yeah.
Thank you for that. I don't see anything new in the chat. Some people have shared some sightings, which is really
Yeah,
neat.
definitely. Very cool. There's
Yeah.
some great field guides that are available if you want to learn more, and identify some of the amphibians around you. There's a couple of field guides for Oregon and Washington specifically that are really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Katie. I'm going to turn it back over to Devin to say thanks again.
Yeah, well, thank you all. I mean, it's so great to see everyone sticking around till the end. You guys ask great questions, and we love hearing about all the sightings. So thank you. It was a really great program. We will be sending out the sign-up information for the zoo's amphibian monitoring project again. So in case you didn't get that written down, you'll have it in your email soon. But thank you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Saturday.